She spent 4 hours folded into a corner booth at one of Boston's most exclusive private dining clubs, nursing the same glass of sparkling water until the bubbles died, wearing a dress that had cost her 3 weeks of careful saving, and the man who invited her never walked through the door. But the man who did walk through it changed everything. The dress was burgundy. Maren Hollis had found it on a Tuesday afternoon in a consignment shop on Newbury Street, wedged between a sequined blazer and a moth-eaten fur coat. And when she pulled it out and held it against herself in the narrow mirror, something shifted in her chest. A quiet, unfamiliar warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. The fabric was a heavy silk crepe that draped over her full hips and rounded belly with the kind of generosity that most clothes refused her. The boutique owner, a small, older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, had looked over the rim of those glasses and said simply, "That one was made for a woman who takes up space." Don't apologize for it. Maren bought it on the spot. She had worn it tonight for Owen Presley. Owen was a senior financial analyst at the consulting firm, where Maren worked as an in-house accountant, handling the books for mid-tier corporate clients. He was the kind of man who smiled in meetings in a way that made you feel briefly, brilliantly chosen, and then smiled the same way at the woman beside you 30 seconds later. Maren had known this about him for 2 years. She had filed the information away in the quiet, analytical part of her brain, the same part that caught mismatched ledger entries and offshore irregularities before anyone else did. She had noticed the smile. She had noted its pattern, and then 3 weeks ago, he had turned that smile directly at her over a conference table, and she had made the single most uncharacteristic decision of her adult life. She had said yes. It started with coffee, then a Tuesday night phone call that stretched past midnight, Owen's voice warm and attentive in a way that made her sit cross-legged on her kitchen floor at 1 a.m., laughing at something he said about his terrible college roommate. Then another call, then a text thread that hummed with a low, easy intimacy. He told her she was the sharpest person in any room she walked into. He told her he'd been too intimidated to approach her for months. He asked if she'd join him at Linden House, Boston's most coveted private dining club, the kind of place that had a 6-month wait list and a dress code that didn't need to be written down because the clientele simply knew. He said he had a connection. He said to wear something beautiful. She had. She arrived at 7:58. The maitre d', a tall, humorless man with the posture of a military officer, had looked at her reservation, Presley, party of 2, and led her to a corner booth with the particular brand of professional courtesy that made her feel simultaneously welcomed and assessed. She ordered sparkling water. She checked her phone. By 8:45, there were 2 texts from her friend Dana asking how it was going, and 0 from Owen. By 9:30, the waiter, a young man named Felix, who had the decent humanity to stop making sympathetic eye contact, had quietly refilled her water glass 3 times without being asked. By 10:15, Maren had done the math that she always eventually did, the same cold, clear arithmetic she applied to balance sheets and discrepancy reports. She had tallied the evidence, the weeks of warmth, the deliberate attention to her specific insecurities, the choice of venue that would make her feel too conspicuous to simply leave early. She had been curated. She had been selected for a purpose she didn't yet understand, and whatever that purpose was, Owen Presley was not coming to explain it. She reached into her bag. Her hand closed around her card holder. She would pay for the water, tip Felix generously, and walk out of Linden House with whatever shred of dignity a woman in a borrowed burgundy dress could carry. She was halfway out of the booth when the room went silent, not the natural, gradual quiet of a dinner crowd winding down. This was a different kind of silence, sudden and complete, like a hand pressed over a mouth. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The soft piano coming from the far corner went still between notes. Maren felt the shift before she processed it. Some old animal part of her brain registering the illness of 24 wealthy Bostonians who had just become very, very still. 6 men entered through the main doors. They moved with a quiet, organized precision that had nothing to do with haste and everything to do with control. Dark suits, no ties, hands loose at their sides. But something in the way those hands rested, something in the slight outward angle of their arms, told Marin that reaching the inside of a jacket was a motion each of them could complete in under a second. They spread across the room in a pattern that was not random. They were covering exits. The man who followed them through the door did not rush. He didn't need to. He was broad-shouldered and dark-haired, somewhere in his early 40s, with a face that might have been called classically handsome if it weren't for the absolute absence of warmth in it. His cheekbones were sharp, his jaw set, his dark eyes moving across the room with the unhurried efficiency of someone conducting an inventory. Not of the decor, of the people. He wore a charcoal suit that had clearly been made for him specifically, and he moved through the dining room of Linden House the way most men moved through spaces they owned. Which, Marin would later learn, was exactly what this was. His name was Rafferty Crane. If you lived in Boston and paid any attention to the city's architecture of power, the real architecture, the kind that didn't show up in zoning documents, you knew the name. Rafferty Crane controlled the Northeastern distribution network that kept certain private ports running quietly without federal oversight. He had a legitimate face. A holding company, a property development firm, a small hedge fund with impeccable returns. He had never been indicted. Witnesses had a documented tendency to relocate or reconsider their earlier certainty. The FBI had a file on him that was reportedly the length of a novel and had produced nothing. One of Crane's men stepped forward. His voice was flat and carried easily in the silence. "Linden House is closed for the evening. Please make your way to the service exit. Leave your belongings at the table. Do not use your phones." The panic was muted and total. Chairs scraped. A woman dropped her clutch and didn't stop to pick it up. The Maître D', who had assessed Marin with cool professional authority 2 hours ago, was now the color of old chalk, ushering guests toward the back of the room with trembling deference. Within 90 seconds, the dining room had emptied of everyone except the staff, who were clustered near the kitchen entrance like a small, terrified flock, and Marin, who had not moved. She had meant to move. She had told her legs to move. But the arithmetic in her head had done something strange. It had kept running, kept calculating, and some part of her knew that a woman in a corner booth sliding out mid-evacuation was more conspicuous than a woman who stayed still. So she stayed still. And then the moment passed, and the room was empty around her, and the heavy sound of a deadbolt being thrown. And Rafferty Crane was walking toward her. And Rafferty Crane was walking toward her. He moved through the emptied restaurant without hurrying, his eyes already on her. Had been, she realized, since before the room cleared. He stopped at the edge of her table. This close, he was larger than she had registered from across the room, and there was something about the stillness of him that was more alarming than movement would have been. He looked down at the empty booth across from her, then back at her face. "You didn't leave," he said. It wasn't a question. "I noticed," Marin said. Her voice came out steadier than it had any right to. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not warmth exactly. More like recalibration. He pulled out the chair opposite her, not the booth bench. The chair, which he had one of his men produce from a nearby table, with a single gesture, and sat down. His posture was unhurried. His eyes did not leave her face. "You were waiting for Owen Presley," Rafferty Crane said. The name landed between them like something dropped from a height. Marin kept her expression even by force of the same professional discipline that kept her voice level in boardrooms when she was identifying numbers that were going to make someone very uncomfortable. "Yes," she said. "He didn't show." "No," Crane agreed. "He didn't." He studied her for a moment. Tell me what you know about his work. He's a senior financial analyst at Kellerman Consulting, Marin said carefully. I work there as well. Internal accounts. Internal accounts, Crane repeated. He leaned forward slightly, and the shift in proximity was not threatening exactly, but it was deliberate. Then you know what goes through the internal accounts. I know what's in the internal accounts, Marin said. That's my job. Kellerman Consulting manages money for a number of my legitimate holdings, Crane said. The word legitimate carried a dry, faint inflection that was the closest thing to humor she would hear from him. For the past 8 months, I've been noticing irregularities. Small ones at first, rounding errors, timing discrepancies. My financial director flagged it to your firm 6 weeks ago. The discrepancies have since grown to just under $2 million in misallocated transfers. The number dropped into Marin's chest like a cold stone. And Owen, she started. Owen Presley is the analyst assigned to my accounts, Crane said. And Owen Presley has been systematically falsifying reconciliation reports for at least 4 months. He paused. We believe he has a partner with access to the internal ledgers, someone on the inside who can mask the adjustments before they reach the external audit trail. The silence that followed was the particular, awful silence of comprehension. Marin's mind was already moving, already running back through 3 weeks of phone calls and text messages, and Owen's careful, attentive questions. He had asked about her work, once lightly, laughing as she explained the tedium of reconciliation cycles. He had asked, and she had thought it was genuine curiosity, had felt briefly, warmly seen. Whether she ever found anything interesting buried in the numbers. Whether the internal system flagged things automatically, or whether it took a human eye. She had answered. She had been flattered, and she had answered, and she had not connected it to anything, because she was very good at her job, and very bad, apparently, at understanding what she was being positioned to provide. He asked me about the internal audit system, Marin said. Her voice was quiet. About 3 weeks ago. I thought he was just. I thought it was. She stopped. The sentence didn't need to be finished. He was mapping what I knew, what I had access to. Whether the adjustments he was making were visible from my position in the system. Crane was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. What did you tell him? I told him the system was mostly automated, but that final sign-off on reconciliation went through 2 human checkpoints. Marin pressed her fingers flat against the tablecloth. I'm one of those checkpoints. The silence stretched. Behind Crane, one of his men, a heavy scar that ran from his jaw to his collar, stepped forward. Boss, she's a civilian. She didn't know. Crane said nothing. He was still watching Marin. The anger arrived like a tide coming in. Slow at first, then all at once. 3 weeks of texts, 3 weeks of phone calls. The dress, the restaurant. Felix the waiter and his careful, pitying water refills. She had blocked out an entire afternoon to get ready. She had done her hair twice. She had stood in front of her bathroom mirror and looked at herself in the burgundy silk and thought, for one brief and fragile moment, that she looked exactly right. He asked me to walk him through the reconciliation process, Marin said. Her voice was very flat. Last Tuesday. On the phone. He said he was trying to get a clearer picture of how our internal systems worked because he wanted to be able to advocate better for his clients. She looked down at her hands. I gave him a 20-minute tutorial on the exact process I use to cross-check external account activity against our internal ledgers. She laughed once, a short, unhappy sound. I even told him about the 2-day window where flag notifications go to a holding queue instead of active review. I thought he was being thorough. I thought he was impressive. I thought. She stopped. He invited you here tonight, Crane said, not gently, straightforwardly, to a visible location under a reservation in his name, with the expectation that my associates would trace his movements to this restaurant. While they were occupied, he completed the final transfer and walked out of the country. Marin looked up. "You're telling me he used our date as a decoy?" "I'm telling you he used you as the decoy," Crane said. "There's a difference." The anger didn't build any further. It simply arrived at its full size and sat there, enormous and clarifying. She was not going to cry in front of Rafferty Crane. She was not going to cry in front of his 6 armed associates in the empty dining room of Linden House. She had cried in the bathroom at 9:15, quietly and efficiently, and she was done with that portion of the evening. "Where is he?" she asked. "Currently." Crane's jaw tightened. "Unknown. He used a cash ticket out of Logan at 9:05. Our contacts at the airport identified his travel alias, too late to intercept." His voice carried something cold and controlled in it, the sound of a man who was accustomed to certainty and found its absence deeply unacceptable. He would have needed help moving the transferred funds to untraceable accounts quickly enough to make that flight. He needed a specific kind of help, someone inside Kellerman's back-end authorization system. The cold stone in Marin's chest dropped a little further. "The holding queue," she said slowly. Crane's eyes sharpened. "Explain the 2-day window I told him about. If someone submitted a rerouting request during that 48-hour period, it would go to the holding queue and bypass the standard flag alert. It would still show up in the manual review, but only if the reviewer knew to look for it. And the only person doing manual review on Kellerman's institutional accounts this week," she stopped, "is you," Crane said. "Is me." Marin reached into her bag and pulled out her work phone. Her hands were perfectly steady. The anger had done something useful. It had burned through the fear and left her with absolute, crystalline focus. She opened the back-end authorization portal. If he submitted a rerouting during the holding window, the request is still sitting in the queue, flagged but unprocessed. It hasn't cleared yet. The heavy-set man with the scar took another step forward. "Boss." Crane raised one hand. The man stopped. Marin navigated through the system. 3 screens in. 4. The portal's interface was not designed for mobile and the tables loaded slowly, and she was aware of Rafferty Crane on the other side of the table watching her with an intensity that she categorically refused to think about until this was done. Then she found it. "There," she said. She turned the phone to face him. A single pending rerouting request. Submitted at 9:17 p.m. 12 minutes after Owen's flight departed Logan. The destination account was flagged as a third-party pass-through registered in the Cayman Islands, linked by a routing chain of 4 intermediary accounts, each one designed to dissolve after a single transaction. The full transfer, $1.8 million. Sitting in the holding queue, unprocessed. Crane looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "You can reject it," he said. "I can do more than that," Marin said. "If I reject and flag it with a fraud notation, it freezes the entire routing chain for 72 hours. All 4 intermediary accounts lock. The funds sit in regulatory hold." She held his gaze. "He doesn't get paid, and every account in that chain gets reported to FinCEN automatically." The silence was different now. The man with the scar said quietly, "She just handed us the whole network." Crane said nothing. He was looking at Marin in a way that was difficult to categorize. Not soft, not warm, but with a kind of focused, absolute attention that she suspected he gave to very few things and very few people. It was, she realized with a slight shock, the look of someone who was genuinely surprised. Crane said finally, "He thought you were a distraction." His voice was lower than it had been. "He thought I was invisible," Marin said. "There's a difference." She turned the phone back toward herself, held Crane's gaze for one more moment, and pressed reject. Then she pressed flag. Then she pressed submit fraud notation, typed 11 words into the free text field, and pressed confirm. Somewhere, in 4 financial institutions across 3 countries, accounts locked. The heavy-set man's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His scarred face did something complicated. Boss, the chain is frozen. Legal hold triggered across all four. Crane leaned back in his chair. For the first time since he had walked through the doors of Linden House, something in the set of his shoulders changed. Not relaxed, exactly settled. "Get me Presley's alias travel record," he said. "Cross-reference with every departure out of Logan between 9 and 10 tonight. I want a confirmed destination by midnight." The man with the scar nodded and moved away, already on his phone. Crane looked at Marin. "You need to come with me," he said. She looked at him. "I need to go home." "You can't," Crane said. "Not tonight." His voice was matter-of-fact rather than threatening, which was somehow more effective. "Presley gave you his alias. He walked you through the system. When the chain freeze goes live and Finson pings, the first thing his contacts will do is identify every person who had authorization access tonight. You're on that list. If the people he sold the routing information to want to know why the transfer failed, they'll come to me," Marin said. "They'll come to you," Crane confirmed. She looked down at the burgundy dress, at Felix the waiter's careful water glass, still sitting at the edge of the table, ice long melted. She had bought this dress 3 weeks ago in a consignment shop, had stood in front of a narrow mirror and felt briefly entirely like herself, and this was what it had led her to. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. It was true, and it was also partly a decision. "I know," Crane said. He stood up. "That's why you're coming with me, instead of with someone else." He held out his hand, not imperiously, but with a deliberateness that expected to be met. Marin Hollis looked at the hand of the most dangerous man in Boston. She thought about the 4 locked accounts, the frozen routing chain, the 47 minutes of careful work she had just dismantled in 14 keystrokes. She thought about Owen Presley on a red-eye flight somewhere, congratulating himself on a very smooth operation. She thought about the dress. She took Crane's hand. The ride to Crane's residence was 40 minutes of rain-slicked highway, and the kind of silence that was too deliberate to be empty. Marin watched the lights of the city give way to the darker sprawl of the North Shore. The SUV, moving with an unhurried authority that she was beginning to understand, was characteristic of everything in Rafferty Crane's orbit. Nobody honked at them. Traffic seemed to move aside without being asked. The house, when they arrived, was not what she expected. She had constructed, somewhere in her mind, a picture of a fortress. Gates, guards, something that looked like money trying to announce itself as power. What she got instead was a large, spare New England colonial on a private road overlooking the water, the kind of house that didn't need to shout because it had been standing there for 80 years and intended to stand for 80 more. Inside, it smelled of salt air and old wood and the faint, clean scent of a fire that had been burning earlier in the evening. She was given a room, shown where the kitchen was, and left largely to her own devices, with the information that 2 of Crane's people were in the house and 4 were on the grounds, and that nobody would disturb her. She sat on the edge of a bed in a room that looked out over a dark stretch of Atlantic and tried to organize what she knew. Owen Presley, 8 months of deliberate skimming, 6 weeks of escalating amounts, 3 weeks of manufacturing a personal relationship, specifically to extract procedural information that would allow him to time a transfer during a window she had told him about, to a chain of accounts that would dissolve before anyone noticed, on an evening when she would be highly visible in a public location and he would be on a plane. The entire architecture of it was. She hated herself slightly for thinking it. Impressive, in the way that a very well-constructed fraud is always, at some level, impressive before it makes you furious. Her phone buzzed at 1:47 a.m. The number was Owen's. She stared at it for 3 rings. Then she walked out into the hallway and found one of Crane's men, a quiet, watchful man who had introduced himself as Dell and said, "Presley is calling. I assume your employer wants to know." Dell moved. 40 seconds later, Rafferty Crane appeared at the end of the hallway in the same charcoal suit, jacket removed, sleeves pushed up, holding a glass of something that she didn't look at closely. He looked at her phone. He looked at her face. He nodded once. She answered. Marin. Owen's voice on the line was warm, practiced, and careful. The warmth of a man who needed something. She had heard this voice for 3 weeks and had believed it, and the knowing made her jaw tight. Thank God. Are you okay? I'm so sorry about tonight. Something came up. A family situation. I've been trying to reach you. You haven't been trying to reach me, Marin said. Her voice was level. She met Crane's eyes across the hallway and held them. Your phone has been off since 8:52 p.m. I know because I checked. A pause on the line, short, and then recovered. The battery died. Marin, I need to talk to you about something important. So talk, not on the phone. Another practiced warmth. I need to see you. I've run into some trouble, and I need your help. It's about the authorization queue at Kellerman. There's a transfer that I need you to process for me as a favor. The transfer in the holding queue, Marin said. Silence. A different kind of silence this time. Not practiced. Real. You know about that, Owen said slowly. I know about that, Marin confirmed. I also know about the routing chain. I know about the 4 intermediary accounts. I know about the Cayman registration, the titration. Paused. She paused. I flagged it 2 hours ago. The chain is frozen. Finson notification went out at 11:12. The warmth was entirely gone from his voice. What replaced it was something uglier and truer, the voice of a man whose careful construction had just collapsed and who was looking for a place to put the blame. You have no idea what you've just done, Owen said. You stupid. You're an accountant, Marin. You sit in a back office and you rubber stamp paperwork. Did you think you were being clever? Did you think you were protecting someone? I was doing my job, Marin said. Your job. The contempt in his voice was refined, professional grade, the contempt of someone who had always considered her useful and never once considered her a peer. You know why I picked you. Because you're forgettable. Because you're the kind of woman people look past. I needed someone inside the authorization chain who wouldn't be looked at twice, who would be too grateful for the attention to ask the right questions. He paused. You were a mechanism, Marin. An extremely convenient one. The words landed. They were meant to wound, and they did. The way a precisely thrown object wounds. Briefly, sharply, in a place you hadn't thought to defend. But underneath the brief, sharp sting was something harder and older, something Marin had spent 34 years building without always knowing she was building it. The absolute, bedrock refusal to accept someone else's assessment of her worth as fact. I was also the mechanism that froze your accounts, Marin said. So, Dell, standing at the end of the hallway, made a short, involuntary sound that might, in another man, have been a laugh. Crane's expression did something she hadn't seen it do yet. Not quite a smile. Something more considered than that, and more genuine. He stepped forward and took the phone gently from her hand. Mr. Presley, he said, this is Rafferty Crane. The sound that came through the phone, small and distant, the sound of a man who had been running very fast and just ran out of road, was something Marin filed away and would think about later, in the particular way you remember the exact moment a balance sheet finally resolves. My people are at JFK, Crane continued. You're not going to make your connection. A brief pause, in which Owen said something inaudible. I wouldn't recommend that. You don't have the money anymore, Mr. Presley. You don't have the accounts, and the 2 gentlemen I believe you're referencing who were supposed to be waiting for you in Nassau have been redirected. He paused again. The accounts you sold them access to. They'll understand shortly that the access doesn't work. His voice was mild and total. Come home. My people will meet you at the gate. He ended the call. Marin stood in the hallway and breathed. You knew about Nassau, she said. We confirmed it 90 minutes ago, Crane said. He handed the phone back to her. His fingers briefly overlapped hers in the exchange, warm and dry, and she was aware of it in a way that she set carefully to one side. He had a buyer for the routing information in Nassau, a competing network that's been looking for leverage over my accounts for 2 years. He sold them the chain and they wired him the travel money. When the chain froze, they'll know the information was bad. He paused. They won't be charitable about that. So he's caught between you and them, Marin said. He made that calculation, Crane said. Not us. She looked at him, in the low light of the hallway, with his jacket off and the careful architecture of his professional manner slightly relaxed. Not gone, just rearranged. He looked less like a figure from a news brief, and more like a very tired man's that didn't resolve cleanly and was quietly gratified when one did. You could have had someone else process that flag, Marin said. You didn't need me to do it. No, Crane said. Then why? Because you would have found it anyway, he said. Tomorrow morning, when you sat down at your desk, you would have found the pending request and you would have flagged it, and by then, the regulatory window would have been wider and the account protections more complicated, and Presley would have had a 12-hour head start instead of a 2-hour one. I didn't need you to do it tonight. But I needed it done tonight, and you were the person who could do it. Those aren't the same thing. Marin Hollis had spent her professional life in a back office, being thanked efficiently and considered invisible. She had been the woman men looked past, the mechanism, the extremely convenient rubber stamp in a role that mattered enormously, and was noticed by no one until something went wrong. She stood in a hallway in Rafferty Crane's house at 2 a.m. and heard a man who ran the most significant criminal network in the northeastern United States tell her, without softness, without flattery, with the plain, undecorated directness of someone who said exactly what he meant and nothing else, that she was the person who could do the thing that needed doing. She didn't cry. She was definitely not going to cry about that. I want to go home tomorrow, she said. I'll have someone take you, Crane said. And someone will stay for a few days until Presley's situation is resolved and his Nassau contacts understand that the target isn't worth the exposure. He said it the way he'd said everything else, directly, without apology, as a statement of what was going to happen, rather than a negotiation. Is that acceptable? Marin thought about her apartment, the particular quality of its morning light, the desk where she did her best work, the 3 plants she was bad at remembering to water. It's acceptable, she said. He nodded. He turned to go. Crane, she said. He stopped. The 2-day holding window, she said. The one I told Owen about. That's a real vulnerability in the authorization system. It's been there for 4 years and I've flagged it twice internally and been told it's not a priority. She held his gaze. If you have any interest in the accounts your legitimate holdings run through Kellerman being structurally sound, someone with more authority than me needs to push on that. He looked at her for a long moment. I'll make a call in the morning. I want it fixed, not worked around, she said. I want the window closed. The not quite smile again, more defined this time, like something that had been deciding whether to appear and had made up its mind. I'll make sure of it, he said. In the morning, over coffee at a kitchen table that overlooked a grey Atlantic in early autumn light, Rafferty Crane asked her what she was currently paid at Kellerman Consulting, and listened to the number she gave him with an expression of such careful neutrality that she knew immediately it was significantly less than what he considered appropriate. He did not say so. He simply asked if she had ever considered working independently. She had thought about it, she told him, but independent forensic accounting required a client base she hadn't built, and building it meant years of networking and referrals from people who moved in circles she didn't naturally occupy. You occupy them now, Crane said. He refilled her coffee without asking whether she wanted it, whether you intend to or not. She looked at her. She looked at the coffee. Then she looked at him. You're offering me work. I'm observing that you found a structural vulnerability in a system that my financial director, 2 external auditors, and your own firm's compliance team missed for 4 years, Crane said. And I'm observing that you did it from a corner booth at Linden House at 10:15 at night while waiting for a man who had just tried to use you as a human decoy. He looked at her over the rim of his own cup. You want to keep doing payroll reconciliations for mid-tier corporate clients. That's your business. But if you want work that's actually proportional to what you can do, I have a considerable amount of it. Maren Hollis sat with that for a moment. She had spent 34 years being correctly sized up by nobody and incorrectly sized up by everyone. She was tired of the back office. She was tired of being the person who caught the problem after it had already cost someone their money and caught no credit for the catching. She was tired of being forgettable. She wasn't forgettable. She had simply been in rooms where forgetting her was convenient. I have conditions, she said. I expected you to, Crane said. I work independently. You're a client, not an employer. I set my own rates and my own scope, and I don't touch anything I'm not comfortable touching. Agreed, and the Kellerman system vulnerability gets fixed. Actually fixed. I want to see the implementation before I start. I'll have confirmation by end of week. She nodded. She picked up her coffee. Outside, the Atlantic was brightening as the morning clarified, the water going from grey to a cold, clear blue. Owen Presley was met at JFK's International Terminal at 4:47 that morning by 2 men who smiled pleasantly and suggested he might want to come with them. He did not, in the end, find this suggestion negotiable. Maren did not ask what happened after that. Some accounts, she had learned, were better left unreconciled. 3 weeks later, she submitted her resignation at Kellerman Consulting, citing a transition to independent practice. Her office manager said they were sorry to lose her. Her department head said the same thing in an email that was clearly written by his assistant. Neither of them had, in 6 years, learned what her lunch order was. The morning her resignation went through, her phone showed a single text from an unsaved number. A Boston address, a time, and 2 words. First meeting. Maren looked at the text for a long moment. She thought about the dress, burgundy and silk, hanging on the back of her closet door where she'd put it the night she came home. She'd hung it there instead of putting it away. For reasons she hadn't examined yet. She texted back. I'll be there. She was not, she had decided, going to be invisible anymore. She had tried invisible. It had not, on balance, worked out particularly well. She had sat in a corner booth for 4 hours in a dress that commanded attention, and the most dangerous man in Boston had walked through the door and seen her. Not despite the dress, not despite the space she took up, but because of exactly who she was in the moment he walked in. The room had been empty. She had been the only one left. And that, she was increasingly certain, was not a coincidence. That was just what happened when you stopped apologizing for the space you occupied.